The flow state is in situations in which the demand of the situation is slightly beyond your skills. So you both have to apply all the skills you can with as much sort of attention and concentration as you possibly can, and you have to actually be stretching your skills. Now, in this circumstance, people report optimal experience. Optimal in two ways. Optimal in that this is one of the best experiences I've had in my life. It's distinct from pleasure, and yet it explains why people do very bizarre things like rock climbing, because it's a good flow induction, right? But they also mean optimal in a second sense, my best performance. So it's both the best experience and the best performance. So Csikszentmihalyi also talked about the information flow conditions you need, right, in order for there to be this state of flow. And then I'll talk about what it's like to be in flow in a sec. What you need is three things. You need the information that you're getting to be clear. It can't be ambiguous or vague. Think about a rock climber. If it's ambiguous and vague, you're in trouble, right? There has to be tightly coupled feedback between what you do and how the environment responds. So when you act, there's an immediate response. There isn't a big time lag between your action and your ability to detect the response from the environment. Third, failure has to matter. Error really matters.
So there should be some anxiety about failure.
And failure matters. So that, because...
Back to you, the person that participates.
Yes. Now, when you're in the flow state, and notice how this sits on the boundary between the secular and the sacred. When you're in the flow state, people report a tremendous sense of at-one-ment with the environment. They report a loss of a particular kind of self-consciousness, that narrative nurturing nanny in your head that, how do I look? Do people like me? How do I look? How's my hair? Do people like me? Should I have said that? That all goes away. Mm-hmm. You're free from that. You're free from the most sadistic superego self-critic you could possibly have, at least for a while. The world is vivid. It's super salient to you. There's an ongoing sense of discovery. Although often you're exerting a lot of metabolical effort, it feels effortless. So in the flow state, when you're sparring, your hand just goes up for the block, and your strike just goes through the empty space. Or if you're a goalie in hockey, I got to mention hockey once. I'm a Canadian, right? Yeah. You put out your glove hand, and the puck's there, right? So there's this tremendous sense of grace, at-one-ment, supersalience, discovery, and realness. People don't, when they're in the flow state, they don't go, I bet this is an illusion. The interesting question for me and my co-authors in the book, in the article we published in the Oxford Handbook of Spontaneous Thought with Arian Hara-Bennett and Leo Ferraro, is that's a descriptive account of flow. We wanted an explanatory account. What are the causal mechanisms at work in flow? And so we actually proposed two interlocking cognitive processes. The first thing we said is, well, what's going on in flow? Well, think about it. Think about the rock climber. The rock climber, and I talked about this earlier, they're constantly restructuring how they're seeing the rock face. They're constantly doing something like insight. And if they fail to do it, they impasse, and that starts to get dangerous. So they got to do an insight that primes an insight that primes an insight. So imagine the aha experience, that flash and that moment, and imagine it cascading. So you're getting the extended aha. That's why things are super salient. There's a sense of discovery. There's a sense of at-one-ment, of deep participation, of grace. But there's something else going on too. So there's a phenomena called implicit learning, also very well replicated, starts way back in the 60s with Reber. You can give people complex patterns like number and letter strings, right? And they can learn about those patterns outside of deliberate focal awareness. That's what's called implicit learning. And what's interesting is if you try and change that task into, tell me the pattern, but explicitly try to figure it out, their performance degrades. So here's the idea. You have this adaptive capacity for implicit learning. And what it does is it results in you being able to track complex variables in a way, but you don't know how you came up with that knowledge, right? So you get, and this is Hogarth's proposal in educating intuition. Intuition is actually the result of implicit learning. So an example I use is, how far do you stand away from somebody at a funeral? There's a lot of complex variables. There's status, closeness to the person, your relationship to them, past history, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And yet you know how to do it. And you didn't have to go to funeral school.
Yeah.
I'm just using that as an example. So you have these powerful intuitions. Now, here's Hogarth's great point. Implicit learning, remember I said before, the things that make it adaptive make us subject to self-deception. Here's another example. Implicit learning is powerful at picking up on complex patterns, but it doesn't care what kind of pattern it is. It doesn't distinguish causal patterns from merely correlational patterns. So implicit learning, when we like it, it's intuition. When it's picking up on stuff that's bogus, we call it prejudice or all kinds of other names for intuition that's going wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, he said, okay, what do we do? What do we do about this? And this will get back to flow. What do we do about this? Well, we can't try to replace implicit learning with explicit learning because we'll lose all the adaptiveness to it. So what can we do explicitly? What we can do is take care of the environment in which we're doing the implicit learning. How do we do that? We try to make sure the environment has features that help us distinguish causation from correlation. Mm-hmm. What kind of environments have we created that are good at distinguishing causation from correlation? Experimental environments. What do you do in an experiment? You make sure that the variables are clear, no confound, no ambiguity, no vagueness. You make sure there's a tight coupling between the independent and the dependent variable, and your hypothesis can be falsified. Error matters. Now look at those three, Lex. Those are exactly the three conditions that you need for flow. Clear information, tightly coupled feedback, and error matters. So flow is not only an insight cascade, improving your insight capacity, it's also a marker that you're cultivating the best kind of intuitions, the ones that fit you best to the causal patterns in your environment.
But it's hard to achieve that kind of environment where there's a clear distinction between causality and correlation, and it has this the rigor of a scientific experiment.
So, fair enough. And I don't think Hogarth was saying it's going to be epistemically as rigorous as a scientific experiment. But he's saying, right, if you structure that, it will tend to do what that scientific method does, which is find causal. Think of the rock climber. Mm-hmm. All of those things are the case. They need clear information, right? It's tightly coupled and error matters. And they think what they're doing is very real because if they're not, conforming to the real causal patterns of the rock face and the physiology of their body, they will fall.
Is there something to be said about the power of discovering meaning and having this deep relationship with the moment? There's something about flow that's really forgets the past and the future, and is really focused on the moment.
I think that's part of the phenomenology, but I think the functionality has to do with the fact that what's happening in flow is that dynamic, non-propositional connectedness that is so central to meaning is being optimized. This is why flow is a good predictor of how well you rate your life, how much well-being you think you have, which of course is itself also predictive and interrelated with how meaningful you find your life. One of the things that you can do, but there's an important caveat, to increase your sense of meaning in life is to get into the flow state more frequently. That's why I said you want a moving practice that's conducive to the flow state. But there's one important caveat, which is we, of course, have figured out, and I'm playing with words here, how to game this and how to hijack it by creating things like video games. I'm not saying this is the case for all video games or this is the case for all people, but the WHO now acknowledges this as a real thing, that you can get into the flow state within the video game world to the detriment of your ability to get into the flow state in the real world. What's the opposite of flow? Depression. In fact, depression has been called anti-flow. So you get these people that are flowing in this non-real world, and they can't transfer it to the real world, and it's actually costing them flow in the real world. So they tend to suffer depression and all kinds of things.
Oh, your ability, your habit, and just skill at attaining flow in the video game world basically makes you less effective, or maybe shocks you at how difficult it is to achieve flow in the physical world.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the.
I don't sort of want to push back against the implied challenge of transferability, because there's a lot of I have a lot of friends that play video games. A very large percent of young folks play video games, and I'm hesitant to build up models of how that affects behavior. My intuition is weak there. Oftentimes, people that have PhDs are of a certain age that they came up when video games weren't a deep part of their life development. I would venture to say people who have developed their brain with video games being a large part of that world, are in some sense different humans. And it's possible that they can transfer more effectively some of the lessons, some of the ability to attain flow from the virtual world to the physical world. They're also more, I would venture to say, resilient to the negative effects of, for example, social media or video games. They have that, maybe the objectification or like the over-sexualized, over-violent aspect of video games. They're able to turn that off when they go to the physical world and turn it back on when they're playing the video games probably more effectively than the old timers. So I just want to say that sort of, I'm not sure. It's a really interesting question how transferable the flow state is. Okay. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I do. First of all, I did qualify, and I'm saying it's not all the case for all video games or for all people. I'm holding out the possibility, and I know this possibility because I've had students who actually suffer from this and have done work around it with me.
The ability to achieve.
They couldn't transfer. Yeah. And then they were able to step back from that and then take up the cognitive science and write about it and work on it. Also, I'm not so sure about the resiliency claim because there seems to be mounting evidence. It's not consensus, but it's certainly not regarded as fringe, that the increase in social media is pretty strongly correlated with increase in depression, self-destructive behavior, things like this.
I would like to see that evidence because
I can find it.
No. Let me. I'm always hesitant to too eagerly kind of agree with things that I want to agree with. That there's a public perception. Everyone seems to hate on social media. I wonder, as always with these things, does it reveal depression or does it create depression?
Sure.
This is always the question. It's like whenever you talk about any political or ideological movement, does it create hate or does it reveal hate?
And that's a good thing to ask. And you should always challenge the things that you intuitively want to believe. I agree with that.
Yeah. Like aliens.
So one of the ways you address this, and it's not sufficient, and I did say the work is preliminary, but yes. If I can give you a plausible mechanism that's new, and then that lends credence. And part of what happens, right, is illusory social comparison. Think of Instagram. People are posting things that are not accurate representation of their life or life events. In fact, they will stage things, but the people that are looking at these, right, they take it often as real, and so they get downward social comparison. And this is like compared to how you and I probably live, where we may get one or two of those events a week. They're getting them moment by moment. And so it's a plausible mechanism that why it might be driving people into a more depressed state. So
okay, the flip side of that is because there's a greater gap going from real world to Instagram world. You start to be able to laugh at it and realize that it's artificial. So, for example, even just artificial filters, people start to realize like,
yeah,
there's like, it's the same kind of gap as there is between the video game world and the real world. In the video game world, you can do all kinds of wild things. Grand Theft Auto, you can shoot people up, you can do whatever the heck you want. In the real world, you can't. And you start to develop an understanding of how to have fun in the virtual world and in the physical world. And I think it's just to push back. I'm not saying either is true, though.
Yeah,
Those are very interesting claims. The more ridiculously out of touch Instagram becomes, the easier you can laugh it off, potentially, in terms of the effect it has on your psyche.
So I'll respond to that.
Yeah.
But at some point, we should get back to flow.
Yeah. As we engage in flow.
You laugh at the shampoo commercial, and you buy the shampoo.
Yeah.
There's a capacity for tremendous bullshitting because of the way these machines are designed to trigger salience without triggering reflective truth-seeking.
I'm thinking of counter examples because sometimes you're can laugh all the way to the bank. So you can laugh and not buy the shampoo.
Right.
There's many cases. So I think you have to laugh hard enough.
You do have to laugh hard enough, but the advertisers get millions of dollars precisely because for many people, it does make you buy the shampoo. And that's the concern.
And maybe the machine of social media is such that it optimizes the shampoo buying.
Yes. The point I was trying to make is whether or not that particular example is, ultimately right, the possibility of transfer failure is a real thing. And I want to contrast that to an experience I had when I was in grad school. I've been doing Tai Chi Chuan about 3 or 4 years, very religiously, in both senses of the word, like 3 or 4 hours a day, and like reading all the literature and like. And I was having all the weird experiences, cold as ice, hot as lava, all that stuff, and it's ooh, right?
Yeah.
But my friends in grad school, they said to me, "What's going on? You're different." And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, you're a lot more balanced in your interactions, and you're a lot more flowing, and you're a lot more sort of flexible, and you adjust more." And I realized, and this was the sort of Taoist claim around Tai Chi Chuan, that it actually transfers in ways that you might not expect. You start to be able, and I've now noticed that. I now notice how I'm doing Tai Chi even in this interaction, and how it can facilitate and afford. And so there's a powerful transfer. And that's what I meant by, flow wisely. Not only flow in a way that's, right, making sure that you're distinguishing causation from correlation, which flow can do, but find how to situate it, home it, so that it will percolate through your psyche and permeate through many domains of your life.